Okay, this is one of 3 workshops going on at this time, and I'm going to be talking specifically about ADHD and how that's a bit different with people who are super smart. Now, this is not to say that you have to be super smart for these things to apply, but I think there's some special problems that children and adults with high IQ have if they also have ADD. I'd like to begin. I'm fundamentally a clinician. I see patients. That's how I spend most of my time. Some little kids, some teenagers, some adults. But I'd like to begin with reading just a bit of some comments made by a woman whom I saw when she was 38 years old. I'm reading out of a book that I published, copies of which are available, I believe, here at the conference, if anybody's interested. And this is a woman who came because she had some difficulties with her and concerns about her daughter. But let me read for you what she has to say. She said, "You know, I started reading sentences before I was in kindergarten, and everyone in my family kept saying I was so smart. When I was in elementary school, the teachers told my parents that I was almost a genius because I asked so many good questions and knew so much about so many things. In 5th grade, they tested my IQ and put me in a special group for gifted students. All that changed in middle school when I wasn't keeping up with my homework. I started high school in honors level classes, but over a couple of years they dropped me out of all of them because often I just wasn't prepared. I didn't read what we were supposed to read at home, and I almost never did the papers that were assigned. All that really interested me were the school plays and athletics. The guidance counselor and teachers kept telling my parents I could do the work if I only really wanted to. They thought I was lazy. My parents figured I was just bored. They thought the problem was poor teachers and that it would all get better when I went to college. I got into a really good university because my SAT scores were really high, and I had great references from my art and theater teachers. When I got there, I had a great time. There were so many interesting people to hang out with and learn from, but I couldn't get myself organized to get to classes enough and to get the reading done and to write the papers. Everything was always late or just not done. That got me put on probation, and eventually they kicked me out in the middle of my 2nd year because I was failing almost everything. For me, it was all really interesting, but I just couldn't get organized and do enough of the work. It was only after my daughter got diagnosed with ADD that I realized there was something wrong with me other than laziness. There was a problem that could be fixed. Nobody, including me, thought that such a smart person could have any real problems in school." I think when you listen to what she says, you can see the manifestations of the smarts, recognized early, asking good questions, interested in many things. And you can see that she was able to engage with those things that interested her. Remember what I was talking about a little bit earlier this morning, about how people with ADD all are able to focus very well on a few things that are really interesting to them, or when they feel like they've got a gun to their head. But you can also see the story of how she just couldn't get it together to do the things that needed to be done, to get to class when she needed to be there, to get the papers written and the homework done. And if you start adding enough zeros into an average over the course of a semester, even if your test scores are good, you're going to have a big problem. Now, a lot of kids with ADHD, and I'm talking now not only kids as in little kids, but also young adults, with high IQ don't do what you'd expect they ought to be able to do in terms of their ability when they're in school. And often people think, well, you're just lazy. Or you're bored. You know, this stuff isn't really that interesting to you. You're not being challenged enough. The teachers aren't really engaging you on the level that you're able to be interested in what they're doing. Oh, no, you're just resistant to authority. You think you should be able to have everything your way, and you're just flipping people the bird when they ask you to do things. You're baked too much. How do you expect you're going to be able to do well in school if you're smoking weed 2 or 3 times a day? Or you're just depressed, or you're worrying too much. Now, it could be any of these or some combination of these things, but when you've got a really bright, competent student, little or older, and they're not doing what you'd hope for them to be able to do, it's also possible that the problem may be ADHD. But keep in mind, even if they have ADHD, you could also have some of these other things that are on this list. Our first study at the Yale Clinic with high IQ folks, we presented in a scientific meeting in Europe back in '99. And this was what caused us to get really interested in studying this. We had 103 adults who came to our clinic who had high IQ. Now, it's not like it's just a high IQ clinic, but we just collected those cases over the course of a period, a couple of years. You can see the age distribution there, and you can see that many of them were males. And they all fully met the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, but what we were looking for was that they had to have either a verbal IQ or a performance IQ of 120 or above, and this was on a Wechsler IQ test, not a Stanford Binet, and so this is where 155 is about as high as it can go. If you score 120 or above on this particular IQ test, you're in the top 9% of the population. And what we found was that these, remember, they're all adults when they're coming into this particular clinic. Almost all of them had completed high school. There were a couple who had gotten GEDs because they were not able to stay in high school or not willing to. Over half of them had actually finished a 4-year college or university degree, and 22% of them had completed an advanced degree, a master's degree, or a law degree, or a medicine, or a PhD. But the thing which was particularly interesting to us was 42% of them had dropped out of post-secondary schooling at least once. They started in college or university and couldn't keep it up. Some of them obviously went back and did well. And 41% of them were currently in low-skilled or unskilled jobs. So these were really smart people who had not been able to keep up the education which would be likely to prepare them to earn money with their smarts, and in many cases hadn't been able to get jobs that were anywhere near what you'd expect for their ability. Now, there hadn't been very much work done on this in terms of the scientific research, but recently there have been a couple of papers published that are helpful. Anschel and Steve Ferrone published a paper back in '07, where they collected a group of 49 kids with IQs 120 or above, and a comparison group of 92. The 49 had ADHD, and then a comparison group of 92 kids who had equal IQs, but they didn't have ADD. And what they found was when they compared those two groups of high IQ kids, that the kids with ADHD had significant problems with their schoolwork. 22% of these kids had repeated at least one grade. And the comparison for the kids who were smart, equally smart without ADHD, 3%. They had more generalized anxiety disorder, more oppositional defiant disorder, and more bipolar disorder than the kids in the other group. I didn't put all the numbers on because they wouldn't fit on the slide, but the point is they often had other problems in addition to the ADD. And the other thing they found was that almost a quarter of them had relatives with ADHD against only 6% in the other group that were not diagnosed with ADHD. So what they're saying is, guess what? It is possible to have ADHD and still be really smart. Then they did an adult study, 64 with ADHD who had IQs 120 or above, and 53 without. And now, of course, they've got a little longer track record. You can see what the impact of the ADHD may have been. They had a lower quality of life on a scale that was used to assess it. Their jobs weren't quite as far up the line in terms of what you'd expect. They had collected more traffic tickets and had more motor vehicle accidents. Again, this time now it's more major depressive disorder, also more OCD, and more generalized anxiety disorder, and more relatives with ADHD, which suggests that this is genuinely a problem with a heritable disorder. Now I'll talk a little more about the comorbid disorders. That'll be the main focus of a talk I'm giving later this afternoon. But let me just mention OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Some people who have ADD and OCD, it helps them. They worry about getting into trouble, and they can get routines going that often help them. But sometimes it really makes problems with their getting their work done. Why? Because they get so worried, for example, when they're writing a paper, about getting the first sentence just right, that they will spend hours polishing the first sentence and then are unable to have time to write the rest of the essay. And it's not, that they seem incapable of being able to write a rough draft of the whole thing and then go back and clean it up. That's just a minor example of a big problem.